this to the lifetime value of a customer. We'll also walk through a startup currently dealing with the challenges of managing its customer acquisition costs. So firstly, just some housekeeping items. Just mute your phones and computers until the end of the session. We'll aim to have a Q&A at the end there. So just note down your questions and then we'll come back to those at the end of the session. Also, the other thing I would point out is if you're not following Echelon on social media, LinkedIn and Twitter in particular, you're missing out. There's some really great announcements that have happened in the last couple of weeks from Echelon and the portfolio and operating companies as well. So jump on there and you'll see more of what's coming up with Echelon too. So to introduction, so my name is Tim Lamb, aka the Marketing Lamb is sometimes referred to through my Twitter handle. I'll be the moderator, the narrator, the facilitator, whatever you want to call me, but it's a pleasure to be invited to support this great topic, which I think is not only important for entrepreneurs, but just marketers in general. I started my career actually as a journalist in New Zealand before moving into B2B marketing, where I've spent the last 14 or 15 years. But what I sort of found that as a marketer, I wasn't always exposed to unit economics and core marketing metrics. I think that's not uncommon for marketers because a lot of times people go into marketing to create things and not necessarily to manage spreadsheets. But as you go forward, you realize that the things that you create start to cost money and you need to manage those and start to see the return on investment. So I say all that to reinforce that I'm still on a journey and there are things that I learn every day about it. And there's no silly question here. So there's a lot to learn when you're a startup and in this journey, and the journey can be long and really diverse compared to where you started out making the company. So to the star of the webinar, I want to introduce Quimby. So Quimby Melton is Confection's co-founder and CEO. He's responsible for financing, strategic positioning, business development efforts, and day-to-day operations, so aka everything at Confection. He spent the last 15 years building a diverse range of businesses and products. These include a marketing consulting agency, a logistics application for offshore energy market, 2 business marketing apps, a modular housing company, a handful of content sites and short films. So a super person to really provide insights into this topic. So Quimby, welcome to the webinar. I'd love for you to give a quick intro into Confection itself.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today. And first of all, Tim, I would just second everything you said about, constantly learning and, making the metrics that you focus on as important as the things you create. So I thought that was a really, really great intro. As far as Confection goes, for the purposes of this, you can think of it as a cookie replacement technology. Our goal is essentially to help data flow around on the web in a much more robust way, and also while protecting people's privacy. So we really are serving the 2 masters of both everyday web users as well as the businesses who need marketing data to do their best work. And Tim, I think you covered everything else, but I would say, for the purposes of this webinar, I'm an entrepreneur just like the rest of you. And I always love talking with fellow entrepreneurs because I learn so much. And if there's anything I've learned over the past decade and a half working on these things that I can, help make your path a little bit easier, then it's a win for me personally. So I'm glad to be here with y'all.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Quimby. So to the webinar content, firstly, we're going to walk through some of the questions that you can start asking yourself when you start acquiring clients. We'll then go through some of the core SaaS metrics. And although I say SaaS metrics, the reality is a lot of these metrics can be used for any sales cycle. They just happen to be very common in software sales cycles, but we'll talk about how they apply to different sales cycles, as I know that throughout the Echelon portfolio, it's pretty diverse audiences, target audiences that each company has. Then I'll cover off some of the marketing tactics to utilize when engaging with new prospects at various stages of the sales cycle. This will include diving into paid marketing channels and also organic marketing channels, and we'll chat through the difference there. And after chatting through these topics, I'm going to pass over to Quimby, who's going to run through just what customer acquisition costs looks like for him in real time and for Confection. And also Quimby has a couple of takeaways that he's going to utilize throughout his presentation that we will share with everyone after the webinar as well. And then lastly, we'll just close out with questions too. So let's start with some of the questions to start asking yourself. So you've just started to acquire a client or maybe even multiple clients and now you want more. But now you need to balance out keeping those clients that you've just secured and finding more ways to find new ones, which may mean investing even some money or even more money. So you may not have all of the answers to the questions right away, but you need to start asking yourself some of these questions so that you can think about how to forecast or create predictability around your revenue. So some of the questions that you might start to think about is, how much do you spend to acquire a customer? And maybe for a start, it wasn't actually that much. Maybe we weren't spending that much and you got them through your network. Can you make more money from a customer than you spent to acquire them? How long do they stay as a customer? How long does it take them to pay you back? And how much money do you make from them? Seem like really obvious sort of questions, but sometimes you get a bit far down the track and you don't start to come back to some of these questions. Some of the other questions that may come up as you start to sell is whether the solution you're providing will generate recurring revenue through a subscription, or whether there's a defined end in the agreement that you have in your mind. So one of the reasons to think about the recurring revenue is recurring revenue can create predictability and can remove risk as a business. So in many cases, your first clients won't come through marketing investments, like I mentioned, but many companies might underinvest in marketing over time. So one of the reasons to think about this as you go forward is as you start to build up into being a good companies know how to burn capital in the right way. They know how to make those spends, make those investments to spend in marketing and in sales to be able to ramp their business without impacting their sales or impacting their revenue at the end of the day. So if you have solid unit economics, it makes sense to burn capital because on a per customer basis, you're still profitable. I know that Quimby, I'll pass to you in a second because we've chatted about this already, but bad companies often can scale too early because they either ignore the unit economics or misrepresent them by leading to bad outcomes. So Quimby, what other questions do you have when you're starting out? What questions do you ask yourself, and maybe what are those experiences been from your perspective of scaling early?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think these questions are spot on. And one thing I would think about, at the core of all this is building a proper ratio, between what your output in terms of marketing expenses and then your inputs, obviously, in terms of customer value. And a lot of times for me, I'll think in terms of metaphors, and I think about like a spaceship, right, where you're basically circling the Earth, and you have to make periodic adjustments to adjust your orbit, right? And so you burn fuel. So a lot of times when I'm going through these and asking these questions, I think of it in those terms, saying, I have a finite amount of fuel, in this case, cash, right? And if I need to make a strategic burn, right, which is the space terminology that NASA would use to authorize a certain amount of fuel spend to keep an object in stationary orbit, what is that? And what am I going to get from that? And is it worth the burn? So those are the kinds of questions I'm constantly asking myself in terms of I need to get to point X, right? But is this particular strategic burn going to help me do that, or is it not? And is it worth it? So I think those ratios are really important to keep in mind at all times. And when you it'll help you make more proactive and better marketing decisions.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I like that analogy. So let's chat through some of these key terms and metrics that will help you answer some of those questions on the previous slide. So one of the ones that we've talked about, it's in the title of the slide, is customer acquisition cost. So that measures the cost of converting a potential lead to a customer. So businesses will use this metric to determine their profitability because it compares the amount of money that they spent on attracting the customers against the actual money that they will make from the client. So we can calculate customer acquisition cost by using the formula of the cost of the sales and marketing divided by the number of new clients acquired, new customers acquired. So why do we measure this? Well, it's a good indicator of the health of your sales and marketing and then your client services program, especially if you're trying to reduce those acquisition costs. I would say the biggest area that I sort of find is what to include in that total cost of sales and marketing. I think there's probably two buckets or two camps that you can think about here. One is what I've referred to sometimes as fully loaded CAC, and that is all sales and marketing headcount. It's all the sales and marketing tools that you might have. And then sometimes you might just talk about CAC in general, which doesn't include everything fully loaded, but it might include more of those costs and the investments that you're making, especially if you're a heavy paid search company. on the marketing spend in particular. Quimby, what's your thoughts in terms of what to include in that CAC, and whether you should be measuring a couple of different CAC costs over time?
I love that label, fully loaded CAC. And, something you and I've chatted about, Tim, is, your payroll costs, or what you pay your people, are sort of accounted for in other models. And if you're at an early stage, loading those in there probably gives you a distorted view, because you don't have very much coming in. And it may, in soft ways, it may demoralize you. In harder ways, it may make you look less attractive to investors or whatever. So, in the early days, I probably would segment off those costs and just ask myself basic questions about what am I spending in terms of, PPC campaigns, or, any kind of paid digital, and what am I getting for that in return? And this is kind of a point of philosophy, I think, but I think in the early days, it probably makes sense to just include those costs, because adding everything else is going to bloat things in a way that's going to be very distracting, I think.
I think the other point that you sort of made, and when I read your introduction, is you were doing 12 different things. So, when you're starting out, does that mean that a
Right.
12th of your time is spent on business development?
Right.
Therefore, that goes into the CAC costs as well.
That's a great point. You're not always sure which bucket to put your time in, especially if you're
Yep.
a lean team of 2 or 3 people, maybe a a couple of founders or something. So in the early days, I think it's sufficient to get a sense um, of the performance here just by your paid marketing costs. And because the real question is, if I spend, right, what am I going to get from it? And how can I scale that up? And that really allows you to answer that question, saying, if I double, triple, quadruple my spending, am I going to get more in than I'm spending out? If the answer to that's yes, then you're on a good trajectory, and you can always, scale up as you need. So that's the ultimate question, I think.
Yep. And I think there's probably even stuff that to not include. So typically, product engineering support, that's stuff that's not included in
Yeah.
CAC, even when you do grow. So those sorts of things, over time, will not be part of that equation,
Yeah.
no matter how small or big you do get to.
Kind of more. Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. Yeah. Kind of post purchase activities.
And I think the other thing I would say is it's okay to be hard on yourself. You might just want to manage what metrics you share beyond yourself, but I think it's okay to be hard on yourself initially, and maybe keep a couple of different metrics of your all-in costs versus just other general costs, and see how that compares as you grow as well. But I think the one thing I would just say is just be disciplined and have this rigor from the outset, so then you can start to see the trend over time.
And that's the most important point, Tim, is to do this early and often, and chart your progress. And it'll help you avoid mistakes in real time, right? But it'll also encourage you. I mean, a lot of these numbers are very encouraging as you start to grow and scale up, and your marketing performance improves over time, as it almost certainly will. It's very encouraging. So I think for both hard and soft reasons, track early, track often, and definitely track your progress.
So let's move to LTV, or lifetime value. So LTV is a predicted revenue that one customer will generate over the course of their relationship with the company. So it's the estimate of the average revenue that you'll get from a customer over their lifespan. So how long you expect that customer to stick around, and what's the value of that relationship? So in a subscription model, it can be much easier to tell that, especially early on. When you have these longer sales cycles, it can be a bit harder to predict. But if you take a client that might, or a company that may have a monthly subscription, and if you're charging $500 per month and your churn rate is 5%, then your LTV for a new customer is going to be 500 divided by 5%, or $10,000. So it's a little bit simpler in that monthly subscription type business. But even if you're in a longer term, more complex sale, there's different ways to look at it. And the customer lifetime value could be customer value versus the average customer lifespan, with the customer value being the average purchase price versus the average number of purchases. So there's kind of a lot sort of baked in there. But I think at the end of the day, you're trying to work out how long people are going to stick around, and how much money they're going to pay you over that period ultimately.
Definitely. And I think for a company like High Tide, right, where you'll have these enterprise kind of municipal contracts, right? Something like that might make sense for an average contract value, or something like that, where someone may buy once, right, and then not again for a long time, or something like that. So Tim, you're exactly right that, there are different ways to organize this equation based on the type of business you have. A subscription business, is it, one and done enterprise sale, something like that. And I guess it's a good time to plug it too, that, Tim and I are working in the background on basically a Bible of these kinds of concepts. So at some point in the next couple of months, you'll have something like this that will say, this is a good way to calculate this particular value. And it'll be a simple PDF that you can use and manage every day. So that's coming down the pipe, and it should help a lot in terms of discussing these things in a kind of standardized way within the Echelon ecosystem.
Yeah, really big thanks for your help on that too, Quimby.
You got it.
They're great tools to have and share. So that leads us to the customer lifetime value to customer acquisition cost, or the LTV to CAC ratio, which you might hear a lot more about, which measures the relationship between the lifetime value of a customer and the cost of acquiring that customer. So your LTV to CAC ratio is an indicator of a customer's value, relative value to how much it costs to earn them. So it can be a signal of profitability and of the sales and marketing efficiency. So customers should aim to find the right balance to ensure that they're getting the most out of their financial investments. So I think if you look at recouping your costs over the first year, then your LTV to CAC should be somewhere around 3 to 1. So in other words, the value of the customers should be 3 times more than the cost of acquiring them. So if it's closer to 1 to 1, so that means if you're spending the same amount as it is that they're spending on your products, then that's way too low. If it's higher than 3 to 1, and maybe something like 5 or 6 to 1, that's probably a good place to be. And maybe there's even more room to invest in marketing and sales. Quimby, what do you sort of tend to see on the LTV to CAC ratio?
Yeah, I would agree with you. They're kind of the best practice metrics. And one of the slides we'll see towards the end of the presentation is, once you get that ratio right, it's very empowering, because you can essentially control your growth in a very proactive way. So maybe I'll save my comments when we get to that slide. But basically, yeah, I mean, I think these are best practice metrics in terms of if you're doing 3 to 1, then you're winning basically.
And a couple of other metrics just to think about too. Firstly is the payback period. So how long it takes to get your money back. So if you spend $10,000 to get a customer, how long will it take until you get your 10 grand back? And then the other one, which I did mention a little bit earlier, is just about the churn. That's a percentage of people that are leaving. So for startups, measuring churn rates are a great metric as a starting point to really understanding maybe the perceived value of your solution or product in the market. So I think the first thing to acknowledge, though, is that churn is inevitable. It's going to happen, but it's just how much and how often. So it's important to track your churn rates over time, with probably 5 to 7% annual churn rate being a number that is okay to deal with. Quimby, if you look at churn and payback period, do these two metrics matter at different times in a company's life cycle? For example, is payback period more important for early stage companies?
I think that it's inevitable that your payback period is going to be quite long in the early days, but as you start to grow, right, and you start to progress through your alphabet rounds, something like capital efficiency, right, is something that like private equity would be very interested in, and even like everyday investors, you could make the argument that's really what equity stakes is a way of leveraging capital efficiency. So if you put $1 into the machine, how much time does it take to get more than that back out, right? So I think at a long-term stage, more important than the beginning, because it's just not going to be very fast in the beginning. And churn's the same way, where I don't know this, but I suspect churn probably increases as you go further in time. So you're dealing with more people, and it probably increases. So like right now, we don't have any churn because we have like 3 paying customers, right? So it's a metric I think is going to increase over time, and that makes sense. And I think the best practice, as long as you keep it like 1 to 3%, you're in pretty good shape, especially for a subscription company. Again, back to the idea of people who are selling like one-time contracts or something like that. That might be a different metric, and we have to think about how to do that. But for a subscription company, 1 to 3%, I think you're in best practice range for sure.
Yeah, the other thing you might find with churn too is that over time you might have bad customers. They might have customers that just eat up a lot of your client services team, or that just aren't a great fit for you as a business too. So sometimes churn isn't just a terrible thing if customers do part ways.
And we probably saw it, Tim, in our agency days and whatnot. I mean, we've seen those kinds of things. I'm sure you've seen them as well, where some customers just suck up all your bandwidth and then they go away and you realize, oh my goodness, we're suddenly more profitable or whatever. So, I mean, I think especially in a service-based business, that could be 100% true.
Yeah. The funniest quote I ever heard about bad customers was that if you take your bad customers, you put them in a limousine and send them down to your competitors' headquarters, so that you give them a good experience as they're leaving, but drive them right to your competitor's place.
That's great. That's a classic.
So, so now you're ready to start acquiring more clients, and you may have even more budget set aside to do so. But where do you start investing? So, from a marketer's perspective, and this is the world that I live in, I think investing in demand generation and marketing is a great place to start. And there's two different sets of tactics that you can invest in, but I think they're really best done in parallel rather than separately. So we'll get granular into these two in the next two slides, but firstly, organic marketing channels and tactics are those that require resources, but maybe not necessarily a financial investment. So the benefit to implementing some of these tactics is that you can aim to reduce the paid investments over time, and you may be creating a reputation and a brand that drives people back to you organically. And secondly, the paid channels are ones that require both resources and a financial commitment. However, while the path to generate new leads and ultimately new business may require a higher investment, it will typically accelerate lead generation quicker than organic channels, especially if done right. I think the one area I won't touch on here, which I've deliberately left aside here, but I know that, for example, Matt Eggers from Breakthrough Energy has some great lecture slides around this, is around partnerships, referrals, and networks. It's such a great area, but I think it's such a standalone topic that is part of not just marketing and sales, but part of strategy in general. I don't want to undo this area. And I think we probably set aside a special session on partnerships, networks, and referrals as well. But it's a great avenue for lead generation, but I think it's really important that that one's done right. So let's chat through some of these organic marketing channels. So I think I'd really I would suggest starting with content that has the lowest path to resistance. So blogs and social media are things that you can start working on as a business. It makes your business look real. It makes it look alive. And I would say in terms of creating topics, sometimes this can be one of the hardest things, is just trying to get some topics out there. But I would say start with those that don't require too much investment. Remember, most of you are on a journey, not only as an expert in your own industry, but as an entrepreneur. In addition to creating content about your industry, create content about your journey, whatever stage in life you're at. That's the stage you should write about. So maybe this is your third attempt at a startup, and now you know better. Maybe you started the business in the same week that you had your first baby. There's people out there that are going to resonate with these topics, as well as your journey in that niche industry. So don't think too hard about the stories you need to tell. Just start telling your journey, and that can be done through blogs and social media. I would say webinars and videos are another great tool that can be done on a pretty low cost these days. And I do want to highlight the fantastic job that Austin and the AIonics team have done with the fortnightly sessions. And to me, this is really a marketer's dream, to have a leader that is championing the creation of content. And what I think is important about the webinars is that they set a deadline, which most people will always commit to. And it also generates content that can be reused in different formats beyond that date. But if you think about a webinar compared to a white paper, most people can easily push off a blog or a white paper to the next week. But if your name's on a webinar or in a trade show presentation, you're pretty sure that you're going to turn up to that. And also with webinars and videos, it sort of diversifies contents away from just the written word. I'd say that podcasts are similar. And while there's a bit of work to getting podcasts off the ground, they're great diversification for your content. Rubicon Global, one of Echelon's portfolio companies, actually created a podcast called The Town Hall and focused on sustainability guests. The popularity led to it becoming #1 on the iTunes business charts, which was not only a great content generator, but a great brand builder for them. Public relations can not only help with credibility, but it can also help by having articles in reputable online publications which link back to your website, which helps your website traffic. And I know, Quimby, that's one area you've been working on recently and had some success even in the last week there too.
Yes, indeed.
And so some of the other, what was I going to say? The conference presentations. was one of the other points here. So very similar to webinars, but I think just with a different audience. And I think one of the benefits with trade show presentations or conference presentations is that it's often live, and often the attendance is driven by a third party. So you don't have to do that hard work yourself, and you're getting in front of a different audience. This can help with credibility, and it also helps with content generation at the same time too. The one I did skip over there was the additional content, the other content. So there's other content you can create throughout the different stages of the sales cycle. It could be a white paper, or it could be an ebook. And these can be useful in another way because you can put them behind a form on your website. And if you have enough valuable information, people won't mind giving their contact details in return for that content. And then it's directly working as a lead builder for you and your team. The other tactic I would say that I haven't listed on here specifically is email outreach and email nurture campaigns, whether it's one-to-one or in bulk. And that's where tools like HubSpot, Marketo, Pardot come into play. And I didn't include it on here because in my view, to have an effective and automated marketing email program, you need to have a lot of these things to offer. And so in most cases, the things that you're offering is the content that we've got listed here. So once you've got this content, you can develop out an email program that helps to complement all of this activity. Quimby, anything missing here?
No, nothing missing. I just wanted to underscore two things that you said. I'm going to post a link here to the chat. This guy's named Andy Raskin, and he's got this concept about strategic narrative, and it's as an old English major, it really appeals to me. And so what Tim said about telling your own story or telling a story is mission critical when it comes to this. So let me give you an example. So the idea of strategic narrative. So Confection's strategic narrative, the one that's settled on anyway, is the Exodus story. So the idea is that we pitch as the front end, that the browser level has become unstable. We're leading an exodus to the server side. People are going to have more control over their data, and businesses are going to have more reliable data in the promised land, right? So it's a classic kind of Exodus story. So I would spend some time, read Andy's stuff. It's all great, and there's a lot of people out there. He's just someone that I kind of know, so I like his stuff. Think about the story you're trying to tell. What's your strategic narrative for your company? It's a powerful model. And then back to Tim's point that content velocity matters, right? Publishing more often. Even if you just keep a note on your phone and, like at night before you go to bed, you put your kids down or whatever, you send a little Twitter message or something. I think that that's really important. Anything that amplifies that story again and again is a very powerful mechanism. So think in terms of content velocity. What can you make quickly? What story you're trying to tell? What's your personal journey? Like Tim's right, that content is deadly. And then one other thing I would just add is like the cornerstone of the inbound / content philosophy, like why it's valuable and why it works, is if you can give people something that will help them, whether they ever become a customer or not. That's the magic of inbound. That's the magic of good content. And we have lots of examples of that. And Tim's going to share some things that I put together. There's a couple PDFs and there's a spreadsheet we'll show you in a moment. We can take these things away. And if you can think in those terms of I'm building something that people can use whether they work with me or not, lead generation will become a very natural thing for you and you'll never have to worry about that again. So just to underscore those three things, velocity, strategic narrative, and make things that people can use whether they work with you or not as a customer.
Yeah, great points. So let's go into those channels where you may need to make some financial investments for quicker returns. So I've called out a couple of different types of paid advertising here, and there's probably even more as you get into display advertising and being able to advertise within different digital and online networks. But let's start with these ones. Firstly, what's commonly referred to as PPC or pay-per-click. These are generally the top searches on Google. So if you go away and do a quick search on Google, you'll see that there's a little AD next to some of those ones at the top, standing for advertisement, which is the paid ones. So PPC, though, is one of the most, I would say, complex forms of advertising initially because it can be really costly if not managed well, if not targeted correctly. You're bidding against other advertisers for the best spot on the search page. So the more popular a search, the pricier it will be. Once someone clicks on your ad, you pay, hence the pay-per-click. So it's really important that once they click, there is a call to action on that page as a next step. One good place to start with, I think, PPC-like investment is what's called remarketing or retargeting. If you've ever been to a website, and especially a lot of consumer and clothing websites tend to notice this, do it very heavily. You realize that next day you go and search something, and that company's following you around everywhere. There's ads everywhere across the news sites. So that's remarketing. It's serving up ads to people who have visited your website. In most cases, these are people who have had some interest in your solution because they've come to your website and they may just need some coax and come back. Now, there's some caveats to that. There's obviously the folks that come to your career pages, and maybe those that didn't intend to end up there. But there's probably a good chance that people that have come to your website are good people to target, maybe just higher up in the sales funnel. I would say the other form of advertising that has increased in recent years is on social media sites. And for businesses, that would be LinkedIn. But for other businesses, Facebook and Twitter are actually other options to reach out to people. One reason I would use Facebook as an advertising vehicle is that you may be targeting consumers or even very small businesses. And I've noticed that previously when targeting small physical businesses, that's actually a pretty good target because those companies with maybe less than 50 employees actually use Facebook as part of their marketing strategy to tell people about what's going on, use their Gmail address maybe to log in. And so there's the ability to target them a bit more specifically. Whereas Twitter may be helpful to promote your tweets even, and especially for prospective buyers who have a heavy presence on Twitter. Or maybe even your company is very mission driven. There tends to be a bit more mission driven folks on Twitter, or maybe even a timeliness. And there's definitely a timeliness to Twitter if you think about like live sports or things that are happening at the moment. Then this could be a good avenue to piggyback on. And I would say another form of paid lead generation, which I think is very useful when you're in a niche industry, is being able to create content and have those media companies be able to push it out to their audiences, whether it's through paid articles or content syndication. So I have tended to find that this is really, really helpful when you don't have a good list of people to reach out to, and you might be in a very niche industry where it's hard to find the contacts. Lastly, I would say just about trade shows as well. I sort of mentioned that in terms of the presentation side of things, but in addition to the presentations, you can also sponsor or have a booth at some of these shows. Now, I found them to be typically pretty expensive, but especially with long sales cycles, actually a very good return on investment. They cost a lot up front, but there's a lot of payback over time. And I would say it's often worthwhile if you're going to go to the lengths of being at a trade show to think about the sponsorship, especially where you can get back the list of attendees. That means that long after the 2 days that you've been at the show, you'll be able to target the prospects going forward. The other one I would say is direct mail, which has been a real challenge in the COVID era. And I think the biggest challenge is knowing where people are these days, whether they're at a physical presence in their office or they're at home. So direct mail, I think, was definitely making a comeback in the last handful of years because people are so electronic these days that when a physical item came to their desk in their office, there was kind of nothing else on their desk. But in the last couple of years, that's really been tested because it's really, really hard to find out where people will be to get in front of them. So Quimby, without stealing your thunder or over the next few slides, or maybe it's a good segue, just what's your experience been with paid investments?
And yeah, we'll get kind of into the tactics on that. I would say be careful. One thing I would say before we leave this slide, just to think about, is social media platforms like Facebook, Google, LinkedIn can be very good if you know who you're going to reach. So if you go out with a very defined persona of who your customer is, that would be very helpful. If you know the problem you're trying to solve, right? So for example, with confection, like we have a very concrete idea of the problem we're trying to solve. We know who we're trying to solve it for, but really it's a problem. That's when Google searches can become very, very helpful, PPC types of impressions. So before you go out and do a big spend, I would ask yourself, do we know who we're trying to reach? And that leads you to social media. Or do we have a very specific idea of the problem we're trying to solve? And that leads you to Google. So, and the nice things about like pay-per-click is you start to learn, right? As people come in, you start to learn more about those personas. So it's kind of a twofer, I think, with the pay-per-click ads. But before you got to spend a lot, I would ask those two questions and figure out which camp you need to be in. And look, it might be both. It's entirely possible it might be both. I found that most of the businesses that I've worked with, like in a vendor capacity as a marketer or an agency or a consultant, they generally have one or the other, but it could be both.
Yeah, great differentiation. I really like the way that you sort of framed that up between knowing where to go. So good point. So I'll pass over to you, Quimby, to lead me through these slides and just let me know when to change.
You got it. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time and just show you some visual examples. Some of them are a little silly because they're extreme, but they make a good point, I think, that it'll be helpful to you. So, a lot of times I think, and Tim, we can go to the next slide if you want to. So I think, excuse me, I think in the early days, right, people tend to burn a lot of time talking about aesthetics and branding, and those things are important, right, but they're down the road. So if you're part of an early stage team and you find you're spending most of your time debating colors or pictures or logos or what exactly, your brand signifies, like, I'm not sure that you have the luxury to do that. At least the early stage companies I've been a part of don't have the luxury to do that. So instead, I like to encourage people to think about it like fluid dynamics, right? So this is a system that brings information in the form of leads or marketing data, and then sends something out in the case of product and then generating revenue. So that cyclical process, is more like a pipe works than it is like some kind of artist studio. So I would say that's the main challenge I think that a lot of people face. You can't see it too well, but there's a link down here at the bottom. And I did a post on this on LinkedIn if it's helpful to you, about kind of like drawing a very strong distinction between the kinds of data-driven marketing that Tim and I are talking about, and then the more auteur forms of marketing out there that would essentially involve colors and brands and things like that. So, and you can get there, but in the early days, you really want to think of this other way. Tim, we can go to the next slide if you like. Thank you very much. So this is something I would tell the people that I worked with a lot, where, great funnels, like high performing funnels, they're holistically healthy, and they're generally built from the top down. And we'll talk about that in a second. And then they're built across time. So basically the top of your funnel are the people who know about your business a little bit. The bottom are your customers, right? So we want to make sure they're holistically healthy from that entire journey, right? And then we want to learn things to move across time so that we can decrease waste. So when we talk about these things, this is this idea that great funnels are holistically healthy, and we build them across time. So I'm going to show you two funnel examples here. And this is a model we developed for the product that I worked on before Confection, which is called GoConvert. And GoConvert was essentially a pipeline intelligence tool that helped people understand the money they spend at the top of their funnel and how that translated into revenue gains at the bottom. So this is a funnel model that we built that plugs key marketing metrics into different funnel stages and helps you really see how healthy your funnels are. So I think the first one is pretty but pointless. So yeah, all right. So let's just break this down briefly. So what we're seeing here is you've got a $10,000 marketing budget. Your customer value is $100, and you convert 50 customers, right? So this is a retail product. Maybe you're selling some kind of little widget that you sell online or something like that. So all of these metrics here on the right-hand side, they're aligned with some benchmarks that we built. And Tim, I think I sent you that link. We'll make sure you get a copy of that after this too. So essentially this marketing team on paper is doing very well. They go into their meeting every week and everyone pats them on the back. I mean, their CPM is stellar. Click-through rate's amazing. They're, 3%, they're 32% over benchmark. Clicks are basically free, right? Their lead conversion rate is extremely strong, right? 5% of people who come to their site, so 5 of every 100 submit a form, very good. And leads are basically free too. This is like almost 100% below. So the marketing team gets a big pat on the back, but then the VP of sales stands up and says, well, hold on a second, right? We've got some issues here at the bottom of the funnel, because essentially what's happening here is you are hitting all your metrics all the way from the top to the bottom of the funnel. But by the time you get to the bottom, your customer value isn't enough to offset what you spend at the top, right? So it creates this toxic cycle of where you can never really get out of it. And Tim and I've talked a lot about this. And it's interesting because I suspect most of us on this webinar have worked for companies that the funnel looks like this, even if people don't know it. And I think even very advanced technology companies, a lot of times, the reasons they struggle towards profitability, and I'm thinking about household names like Uber and things like that, is because their unit economics are not offsetting the marketing spending they do. So they can never really hope to be profitable. So from my point of view, this slide is really the main takeaway I hope you'll take from this is consider your customer value, and what can I do, what can I do to put upward pressure on my customer value and make sure that we get that right. And then you can really plug in a lot of data here in terms of what you need to spend. And that I would say that's the most important takeaway from this. And any of you feel free to reach out if you want to talk about this in more detail, but this is the most important thing from my point of view. Tim, does that make sense? Anything I forgot or want me to add?
No, that's a great summary.
So the next slide is ugly but virtuous. So essentially what we've done with this funnel is we flipped it around, right? And I love to tell the story about my friend Nick, who's an airline consultant, right? Nick Wangler, he lives in Southern Colorado, and what Nick has is he's got a consulting business where he consults with, I guess mid-market airline companies, right? He has a very large customer value, and he can essentially justify spending anything on marketing because he has such a high customer value. So this funnel essentially tells Nick's story, right? And it's very different from the funnel we just saw where the marketing team is going to get fired, right? I mean, the agency's gone, the CMO is going to get a lecture. I mean, this is a problem because you're doing very poorly here. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because your customer value is so high that you convert one customer, it offsets everything. And I'm not encouraging you to go out and build this kind of funnel. I guess what I would encourage you to do is build one that does both of these, right? Where you essentially have amazing marketing metrics on the top 75%. You have an adequate customer value at the bottom that offsets that. And companies that do both of those simultaneously go gangbusters. And I mean, I think that would be something like an Amazon, where they've found a way to make their unit economics offset whatever they have to spend. And so, they're able to generate, well, they're intentionally unprofitable, but they generate a lot of free cash flow. How's that? Which in some ways is the same thing. So I mean, they make the choice not to be profitable, right? But they have plenty of free cash flow to do whatever they want to with. So this is two versions of the same thing, basically. And customer value, I think, makes all the difference here. So takeaway with this, you go out, work on your customer value, make sure it's adequate to your marketing spending. And back to the first slide where Tim was talking about the proper ratios. Once you get that set down, you're going to be in a great position. Excuse me. So, I think the takeaway on this is you can succeed technically and fail fundamentally, but you can also fail technically and still succeed fundamentally. And the critical metric here is customer value. So, you can't really fix your ROI if you have a low customer value, but you can essentially spend less and still win if you have a higher customer value. So it's a little bit tricky, but I think the main thing to take away is just this idea of customer value really, really counts. And, spend time working on that, and the rest will begin to take care of itself. And there's that great line from Mark Cuban where he said, "Sales cures all," but I think customer value cures all. As long as that's high enough, you'll always do well. This is a workbook. Excuse me. This will be part of the assets that Tim will circulate that we talked about. This is essentially a spreadsheet version of the application that we built with GoConvert, right? It's easy to use. All these white cells you see here, you just plug in your marketing metrics. It's going to tell you where you are above or below your benchmark. There's another column you can't see here that'll essentially give you some tips saying, look, no one's clicking on your ads. Go check your audience models or something like this. So I think if you take this, you click this link, you get to make a copy. I think if you spend some time with this each week and just plug in your marketing metrics, you'll start to see where you have some opportunities. And the goal is kind of gamified in a way where the goal is essentially to turn everything green from top to bottom. And when you know where you need to focus your energy, whether it's on your ads or your landing pages or your sales team or wherever, you can work in a very, very precise manner, and you can start to really lift all your metrics across the funnel. So I hope this is helpful to you. And again, if you ever want to spend 5-10 minutes reviewing together, just reach out to me and we can sit down and review it and talk about some things. But I think it's a helpful asset that I hope that everyone will find useful.
I think it's super helpful. I think the other thing just about having some of those workbooks is that sometimes you just don't even know where to start. So just even having something as a place to start, to be able to put some numbers into, I think that's right. Some of the hardest challenges to overcome, and it's super helpful.
Yeah, man. And to make it part of your routine, kind of the discipline of your day-to-day and week-to-week life as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur, just looking at your metrics, reading them, thinking about how you can improve them the next week. Just that process, the discipline, is I think very helpful as well. So, for me, I'm going to hit a couple of hot points on these slides. I know we're running short on time. The main meat for me, the main takeaway is that idea of customer value and the takeaway with the funnel concepts, and then that spreadsheet. So if you remember nothing else from this, from my point of view, from what I presented, those are the most important things. But I did want to kind of show you some effects, right? Kind of the outcomes of getting these ratios right. So this idea of building a funnel across time is a way of thinking about how you learn things as you go forward. So as you go out and you do your first audience model, probably costs you a lot to market to those people. Your cost per click is going to be high. Your CPM is going to be high. But over time, as you learn more, you begin to put downward pressure on those things. And so essentially over time, your CAC begins to flatten out. And we can hit a couple of these real fast, Tim. So this is an example, of this in action, where you have a lot of volatility in the beginning. It's very expensive, have a fairly high cost of customer acquisition. And then over time, as you learn, it begins to flatten out. And this is just kind of a visual model of that. Confection's fortunate in that our organic channels do really well for us. So this has changed because I'm spending more because, we have to continue to grow. But it is helpful to have really high performing organic channels that you invest in, and will save you a boatload of money. And this is the idea, this is that visualization of that ratio really between ACV and CAC. So, your value should go up. Obviously there's the green, and then your costs should go down. And it's very exciting when you convert your first enterprise customer, or someone whose customer value is very high, your customer value spikes and your CAC gets yanked down. And then what winds up happening is you spend time trying to pull the CAC back up with spending to hopefully lift everything back up. But these outcomes are very exciting to watch and to kind of play around with. So back to the idea of visualizing your data, engaging with it every day, and tracking it over time, like Tim encouraged us to do at the beginning of the call, is mission critical, I think. And this is just, this is a visualization of what Tim was talking about, where basically you have these ratios, and if it'll give you a very precise sense of what you can support. So for example, in this situation, we know that we can support $21.58 per CAC per customer. And that's a very simple equation to go in and say, I spent X last week, I got this many customers, am I in range with this, right? So once you have that value, it's a very powerful metric to be able to work with and say, I'm spending in a way that's going to make me look decent on paper, I guess I would say. And this is the last thing. This is the last slide, right, Tim?
There's one more just after this one.
So the important thing here is the concept we talked about in the beginning in terms of strategic burn, right? So you can actually begin to create lift in terms of your customer acquisition once you get these ratios right. And the funnel the spreadsheet metric, the spreadsheet tool that we built, if it's all green all the way down, you can begin to spend more and more into your most highest performing channels, and you're going to see overall lift in terms of customer value, in terms of customer acquisition. So the end result of this is really a ton of empowerment, where you're basically just pulling levers, right? And it's like, I need to do X number of growth this week, and I need to add X more users. I'm going to pull back this lever. I'm going to do a strategic burn, and I'm going to create lift. So very, very empowering, I think, for early stage companies.
And look,
this is just essentially all these units working in harmony, where essentially, we break this down. We've got marketing spending is yellow. These are free trial accounts that come in. New customer accounts, basically, we define that as people who've had their billing info, and then your account value, and then your CAC. So I think really what you're trying to build is a machine that works in harmony, and just like, an old engine where you have different pieces of metal sort of working in harmony with one another to drive the automobile forward. That's, all of our goal is to build a marketing machine that works, and these different ratios exist in harmony with one another, and lift things that you want to be lifted and put downward pressure on things that you want to be minimized. Great.
Good stuff. We did lots of good stuff in there. So we'll open up for any questions.
And I just say real quick, Tim, again, like there's a lot to cover, in 50 minutes.
Yeah.
So Tim's going to circulate some stuff. One of those things will be my email address. If you want to spend some time to chat after you've had a chance to fill out your spreadsheet or whatever, shoot me an email. We can schedule 10 minutes to review some stuff. So this is kind of the beginning of a dialogue, and just let me know how I can help going forward.
Feel free to unmute and ask questions, or dive on into the chat. I think that just if people are thinking about questions, one of the things I would just say too, Quimby, is that it doesn't really matter what you measure to. Some of these are really complex at the end of the day, and sophisticated. But I think even Kerry and I have been talking about with Echelon. Let's just start measuring things: website traffic, emails going out. Sometimes you tend to think, well, we're not doing that much. Should we really measure it? Let's just wait a little while. But the thing it does is it really sets benchmarks for years to come. And then it also, all of those impact everything else that you do at the higher ROI side of things. So while you might not be serving things up to a board or investor around your email metrics or your web traffic, you might be still utilizing that to help improve, which then at the end of the day will improve your ROI at the end of the day too.
That's right. Just start. So just jump in. Right. And I think it's natural to be overwhelmed by marketing. I mean, I think people would argue with me, but I mean, I think marketing is probably the most complex component for any enterprise, really, in terms of tracking ROI, managing the team. I mean, consider how many diverse skill sets would work on the average marketing and sales team at even a medium-sized business, right? I mean, your content marketer doesn't speak the same language as your sales guys, right? Your brand guy doesn't really speak the same language as anyone else, right? Your data scientist. So the diversity of inputs and challenges make marketing an especially difficult division of an enterprise. So I think it's natural to be overwhelmed. And your advice, what you and Carrie were talking about, is the best advice of all. Just jump in, just start tracking something, and you'll begin to walk and then run.
Perfect. All right. Well, doesn't look like we've got any questions coming in, so we can probably do a bit of a wrap. But Quimby, thank you so much for your knowledge.
Thank you, man. Thanks for your knowledge. This is
great session, really helpful. We'll circulate the handouts as well afterwards, and then, like Quimby said, if there's additional follow-ups we can do. We know they've dived pretty deep into some of these topics, which may be the first time people are hearing about some of these things. So happy to chat separately afterwards. But do appreciate everyone jumping on today.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Use the spreadsheet. It's free and easy, and it will improve your day-to-day marketing tasks. So thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Carrie and Tim as well.
Thanks, Quimby. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Bye-bye,
Fantastic.
y'all.
Bye-bye.
Yo.